Professor Kris Kobach teaches constitutional law, immigration law, and legislation at the University of Missouri, Kansas City School of Law, where he has been since 1996. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree, summa cum laude, from Harvard University in 1988, graduated at the top of his class in the Harvard Government Department. In 1988, the British government awarded him a Marshall Scholarship, which took him to England for postgraduate study. In 1992, he received his doctorate in political science from Oxford University. In 1995, he received his JD from Yale Law School. Wow. He has published 2 books and numerous articles in political science, constitutional law, and immigration law. Kobach was awarded a White House fellowship, which took him to Washington, D.C. to work for the Bush administration in the office of U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft. He has a national reputation as a litigator who defends cities and states around the country against the ACLU. Kansas Republicans know him as the former state chairman of the Kansas Republican Party from 2007 to 2009. You, of course, see him on the O'Reilly Factor. He is currently running for the office of Kansas Secretary of State, Professor Kris Kobach.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that kind introduction. I know a lot of you have already been in the were in the hearing earlier, and I don't want to repeat too much, but I do want to say some basic things that need to be said. And one of them is that, I've been teaching constitutional law since 1996, and this is just amazing what we are witnessing, not only in Kansas, but in many states of the Union, where people are actually out of doors speaking in what I call, and what other authors have called, their constitutional voice. In other words, they're saying, we are speaking as we the people. We're not just speaking as a few Kansans, we're speaking as we the people of the United States, and we are demanding that the terms of the Constitution be followed and that the Constitution be upheld in every respect. And of course, the respect we're talking about today is primarily the 10th Amendment. And it's just amazing to me because for most of those 14 years that I've been teaching, I know that my students have to listen to me because they're being graded. And but I get the impression that, well, no one else. I got the impression very few people outside of that classroom or other law school classrooms really cared much about the 10th Amendment. Well, obviously, we have shown in 2009 and now 2010 that that is not the case. The American people know what the 10th Amendment says, they know what it means, and they want it upheld. The framing generation, the framing of the United States Constitution was not a done deal. The framing of the United States Constitution was something that many of the framers themselves realized could get into hot water. And they were not at all certain that the Constitution would be ratified. In September of 1787, when the document was announced, much of the country was aghast. Why were they initially disposed negatively toward the Constitution? Because they thought that the original Constitution gave too much power to the federal government. The original Constitution, as understood, with a little itty-bitty enumeration of powers in Article 1, Section 8 that Congress would hold, many thought that was too much. And so the Federalists, which were chiefly the people who were involved in the drafting of the Constitution and led by James Madison and Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, they were the ones in favor of this new federal structure. The Anti-Federalists, which were a loose coalition of people around the country who said, no, this is too much. We can't even go this far. That was what the debates were all about in the ratifying conventions around the United States. And a deal was struck. The deal was, and it was initially struck in Massachusetts, which is kind of poetic given where Massachusetts is today. The deal was this. Okay, you Federalists, you want your Constitution. We Anti-Federalists will go ahead and agree in this ratifying convention to vote in favor of ratifying the Constitution, but we insist that there be a series of amendments to the Constitution to restrict the power of the federal government to influence, regulate the individual, i.e. the Bill of Rights, and amendments like the 10th Amendment to restrict the ability of the federal government to exceed its enumerated powers. And we have a government of enumerated powers, and that is exactly what the 10th Amendment says, that the powers Congress has are only those listed in the Constitution and nothing else. And that is what the people of America are saying today. And it is amazing and gratifying to me that so many people are saying, this isn't just some abstract, academic, esoteric principle. This is what American government is all about. And you think about it, sometimes school teachers will say, well, America is the first democracy. No, that's not true. We weren't the first democracy. America is the first representative system of government. No, that's not true either. England had a parliament, a representative parliament. We weren't effectively represented in the American colonies in it, but that was a representative system. America is the first this, first that. Now, what America was truly the innovator of, historically, we were the first system of constitutional government with limited powers that were enforced through a written constitution. That was our innovation to the world. And to this day, if a nation wants to prove to the international community or to the United Nations or whoever, if they want to prove that they're really a nation, that they are actually a sovereign entity, they usually try to do it by having a written constitution somewhere along the lines of the United States Constitution. That was our innovation, and that's what we are saying here. Look, we want this Constitution observed, preserved, and respected. But let's go back to the framing generation. 1787, it's drafted. 1788, the debate begins. The Federalist Papers are basically a series of op-eds written by James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton. Federalist 45 was written 222 years ago, almost to the day. It was written on published on January 26th, 1788. Federalist 45 is where James Madison laid it all out, and he was addressing the concern of so many people who were opposed to the Constitution at that time. Remember, opposed because they thought it gave too much power to the federal government. Here's what he said, quote, "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. The former, the federal government, will be exercised principally on external objects, as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. The powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people, and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state." End quote. That was what our system was, and that's really how our system lasted and was governed and was implemented for 150 years. Through the entire 19th century, that is how it operated. The federal government's powers were truly defined and truly limited, but then things began to turn around, and 1937 is often pointed to as a turning point, and I think it really was a turning point because the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in a series of cases, beginning in NLRB versus Jones and Laughlin, that the commerce power, the power to regulate interstate commerce, could be expanded or could be interpreted to mean you could regulate anything that has a substantial effect on interstate commerce. And so there was a famous case that came down the line in 1942, Wickard versus Filburn. And don't worry, I won't be giving you too many law professor type cases. But you got to know this case. Wickard versus Filburn. Farmer Filburn said, in rejection of the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which was part of the New Deal, he said, wait a minute, this act says that not only does it control the amount of wheat that I put on the interstate market, this act tells me I can't even decide to produce some own wheat here on my home farm that we are going to consume on the home farm, and we're not going to sell to anyone. It regulates how much. It regulates the total. It doesn't even allow me to produce some more on the side that's not going to go into interstate commerce. Supreme Court of the United States said, well, if everybody did that, Farmer Filburn, that would produce a substantial effect on interstate commerce, and so therefore you can't do it.